Hey everybody, Mr. Grove here. Today we're going to talk about phylogenetic trees, or sometimes they're called cladograms. And so this is a way that it helps relate organisms together based on what their traits are that they share, and just helps us organize living things. And so if you were looking at a textbook, a phylogenetic tree or cladogram might look something like this, where we have animals coming off of these little branches, and then we would have little traits that would show up there. And so we're going to make one ourselves. And so for this one, we'll need to fill out our traits in our data table here. So to have two pairs of limbs, so that's going to be a human would have two pairs of limbs, a possum would have two pairs of limbs, and a frog would have two pairs of limbs. Placenta, only the human would have that. Vertebrae, all of our animals here would have that. And our mammary glands is only going to be a trait that just the humans and the possum has. So once we have that data table set up, we'll start to kind of formulate our phylogenetic tree. And so the tree has these little trait boxes here, and so where those red squares are, that's where we'll put the trait, and then the organism itself will come off of the branch. And so for an organism to be in a spot, that means it's going to have any traits that are below it, but not what's above it. So for example, whatever we put here would have this first trait, but not these three traits. Whatever we put here at the end would have all four traits. And so we can kind of go about this a couple different ways. We can put our traits down first, or we can put our animals down first. So for example, if we do this trait, that means all four of these animals are above it. So we're looking for the trait that all four animals have. So in our data table, that would be having vertebrae. So we'll put vertebrae down there because we know all four animals are above it, and so therefore they have that trait. The next trait would be held by three animals, but not one. So what would that be? Well, the trait that has three checks would be two pair of limbs. So we'll put that there. And so then our next trait, two animals would have it and two would not. So that's going to be mammary glands. And then our last trait is just going to be the placenta. So only one animal would have that, and then three would not. When we go to put our animals down, so at the top we can start there if you want. And so we can put human because the human has all four traits. And so all four of these boxes are underneath. Then we have three traits for the next animal, but not the placenta. So which one would that be? Well, that would be our possum. So our possum has the three checks, but not one for the placenta. This animal here is going to have two pairs of limbs and vertebrae, but not mammary glands or placenta, so that's going to have to be the bullfrog because it has two checks in those spots. And then the shark only has vertebrae, but not these other three traits. And so that lines up with our data table. And so what we have here is then our finished phylogenetic tree or cladogram. And so that's one way we would see these. Another way would be if we have the phylogenetic tree, then we want to be able to check the trait boxes. Even if we don't know exactly what those traits mean, we should still be able to tell whether or not something has that trait. So if we're talking about the coyote, well, it's got four traits below it. So therefore the coyote would get a check for all of these. If we're talking about the eagle, it has the trait legs, internal skeleton, and skeleton of any kind below it. But it does not have anything for hair. So we would have to leave that one empty because hair was above it. In the case of the anemone, it's only above skeleton of any kind. So that's the only trait it had. So we'll put a check there. But the other three would have to stay blank because they are above it. And then the bass is above these two traits. So we'll put a check for those. But it's below these two traits, so those would stay empty. And so our phylogenetic tree, which we started with here, enabled us to check the boxes of our data table right here. And so that's a little bit about phylogenetic trees, or also called cladograms, and I hope that was helpful.